With large companies, it's often less the question of what to do, but how to get it done. I had the privilege to be at Shopify when it scaled massively from maybe 3,000 to over 10,000 people in a very short amount of time. In the beginning, it's all about like, what should we do and how do we get to like a post-product fit? Like, how do we scale? How do we grow? And then you get there and then you hit this kind of hyper scale. And then the problem is that becomes more about execution, and I like that. The challenge is that when you're the head of an organization or even just a leader in an organization, you can drive change by command. That is not very popular these days, where it's less of a democratic, meritocratic leadership style, but more like, we're doing this now. I'm the leader, I say so.
Do you think that's necessary, though?
I think too much consensus can slow organizations down a lot. So there's this moment when you spend a lot of time getting context about the company, understanding the market, understanding competitors, and then you kind of look at what options do you have for differentiation, and it just kind of clicks. It's like that satisfying moment where you're like, that's it.
Kevin, I usually don't do this.
That's
like this.
Start.
Yeah, my podcasts are lengthy, an hour and a half to 2 hours, so I need to be super brief now, which is a challenge for me.
Yeah,
thank you for doing Misfit Founders. I know we met. How did we meet? Oh, through SaaS Talk, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. You have your own podcast. Do you still run your own podcast?
I have a podcast with a colleague, Eli Schwartz.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Contrarian Marketing Podcast, and we just challenge general marketing axioms, things that are happening. We look at them from a critical lens.
That's awesome. I've been thinking of starting a podcast with a co-host and just kind of like debating on certain things. So that's really good. Well, thank you for joining me. Let's start with a quick introduction. Who's Kevin and what are you up to?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm pumped to be here, Hero. Kevin is a organic growth advisor to fast-growing startups and enterprises. I work predominantly with, like hyperscalers and fast-growing startups. So right now we've got Dropbox, Reddit, Hims, a couple of other companies, and I've been doing that for the last 2 years. Before then, I was an operator. I led SEO and growth teams at companies like Shopify, G2, and Atlassian. So really, grew from SaaS and had the kind of privilege to be an expert and a leader in that space.
And I'm curious, I think I know what your answer with this is going to be, but why large companies? What is it that attracts you to large organizations?
You mean right now or in the past?
Right now.
Right now. It's a different problem set. With large companies, it's often less the question of what to do, but how to get it done. At Shopify, and I'm happy to tell a lot more about the frameworks I learned at Shopify and G2 and how we approach things. But, I had the privilege to be at Shopify when it scaled massively from maybe 3,000 to over 10,000 people in a very short amount of time. And a lot of time, we brought in some of the best experts in the world from all sorts of big companies you can imagine, from the Facebooks, the Googles, also small startups that made it really big. And we had the expertise, we had the experience and the knowledge, but getting things done and getting them out of the door is the biggest challenge for these large corporations. So I kind of like how in the beginning it's all about like, what should we do? And, how do we get to like a post-product fit? Like, how do we scale? How do we grow? And then you get there and then you hit this kind of hyper scale. And then the problem is that becomes more about execution, and I like that.
Right. So you're the execution guy in a sense.
I'm actually more of a strategist. To be completely honest with you, I'm more of a strategist. But there's more surplus for strategy in big companies as well. In smaller companies, things are more tactical, things are faster. And sure, you have to have some sort of strategy, but it doesn't change as much. At large companies, counter to intuition, the strategy can actually pivot and fight a lot, which is not a good thing, but a trap that a lot of companies fall into.
And is that the most challenging part in what you do?
Yes.
The kind of like fast-paced, things changing overnight.
Correct. Yeah, it is it's the pivots. And to be fair, right, we're just coming, just depends rather, but we had this pandemic, which obviously disrupted everything, right? So obviously there were lots of pivots, as companies should. They should be flexible. But I still see that problem in a lot of companies today, where leadership does a lot of rapid pivots on strategy. And the challenge for a big company is that you have that very long tail of people, and they're getting thrashed around, right? So when you see like even a small pivotal change at the head of the snake will cause like a long wipe at the tail, if I try to make an analogy here, and that causes a ton of issues. But again, like, there's a lot to unpack here. But on the one hand side, from a leadership perspective, you can understand that you want to have the best strategy in place at all times. If you like, that's what matters most. But you kind of have to take into account what that means for people who are quote unquote on the ground. And that is a challenge that I constantly see at companies, where you talk to the people who quote unquote actually do the work, and they're like, hey, every 3 to 6 months, our aims change completely, and our outlook changes completely. And they get frustrated and they leave. And that's what kills companies. That's what slows companies down and kills them. So I'm happy to kind of take a step back and like dive deeper into all these different problem sets. But that is something that is kind of what attracts me to these large companies, is you want to have the best strategy in place at all times, and at the same time minimize thrash for the rest of the organization, all the other teams.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think a lot of large organizations don't think of the impact that people have with large scale change. We tend to prioritize and think about the change challenges, technicalities, and logistics, less about the people involved.
100%. And I totally know how it is, where that comes from, right? I had this is not a boast or a name drop. It just helps to make the point. My Shopify organization was about 100 people, most of the time big, right? And even at that scale, we're not talking about managing 10,000 people. I can only imagine what that's like. But even with 100 people, when you make a strategic pivot, even just a slight strategic pivot, that means you need to reach out. You need to make sure everybody understands where that's even coming, right? You cannot just enter the room and be like, okay, now we're doing this, drop all the other stuff. You need to help people get there. They need to pound the drum on this thing. It doesn't just help to say this once. You need to say it constantly so people internalize it. And they need to help carve a path for people to actually be effective with that new strategy, right? It could, because I try to make the point a bit more it's easier to grasp, right? So let's just say we move from editorial text content to YouTube. Let's just pretend, right?
Right.
Okay, so what are all the people doing that have been working on the editorial content, right? So you have to have a plan for all of that in place. And if you change your strategy every 6 months, that means you're just constantly busy updating and trying to bring everybody on the same page. Now, why does that happen is kind of the more interesting question. Now, again, let's just assume that, we're not in COVID and we don't have to, not everything is falling apart. Like, that's obviously an outlier, right? But usually it's due to market changes, it's due to product changes, and it's due to sometimes just like a feeling of leadership, right? Like, sometimes it's just like they get together on offsite and it's like, oh, should we do this thing? And it's like, yeah, we should do this thing. And it's like, okay, let's do this thing. Again, lots of implications. And so I think actually the too frequent pivots, unless you face an emergency situation, are often the symptom of poor strategy. It means you haven't invested the time to make sure that the strategy you want to pursue is a long-term strategy that makes sense. And so that time saved on defining the strategy often causes these ripple effects. And then you try to course correct and you try to bring the car back on track. And that's where this constant thrashing burnout culture comes from, where people cannot even make an impact. They're not getting promoted because they couldn't show an impact. They cannot adjust to it, right? It has all these consequences. And so when leadership, and I would have included myself in that, back in the days. It's not me kind of, waving the finger at these people at the top. It's like, okay, I was part of this too, right? But we would have taken the time to make sure that the strategy is diversified, it's thought through, and it's something that we can pursue for maybe 3 to 5 years. That is what not only makes a company successful, but also makes the people in the company successful and allows you to leverage their full potential, to be honest.
And who do you work in an organization the most with? Who do you realize that you spend the most time with?
It's often organizational heads. So depending on the size of the company, it will be VPs, it will be C-suite, very often CMO, chief growth, VP of growth, those kind of roles.
Right. I have a follow-up question, but actually I want to backtrack a bit. Why did you decide to go from internal to offering a service for large organizations?
It's funny because I started my career on the service side. I started on the agency side. That's where I learned and that's where I grew. And the benefit of working in an agency is you get this horizontal view. You have many customers or some customers, and you can work across different industries and verticals, and then you can see kind of the same problems, right? And then you go back in house, which to me was, fantastic, because then you can focus, you can go really deep. And now I'm at a point where I wanted to broaden again. I wanted to work horizontally, because the benefit that I can bring to a lot of the leaders that I work with is I can say, oh, I've seen these problems before. Like I'm not going to name the names, right? But like two of my other clients face the same problems right now. That's not just you. So, and here's what worked for them. Or I can travel back in time and say, hey, I've seen that same problem set with another company. This is how we did it and solved this problem. Let me help you. So as an advisor, you have that benefit of being removed from the organization, removed from the trenches. You work with several companies, and I just really enjoy that. I don't have that desire to be very deep right now. I like that broad view. And to be also completely honest with you, man, I needed a break from the intensity of management. It is freaking intense. And after having done that for, I don't know, like 6, 7, 8 years, I just felt like I'm just not in the mind space to go back into that. Maybe some point.
Yeah, I was asking because I was talking yesterday with April Dunford, had her on the podcast, talking about being internal versus having your own consultancy, and she mentioned that it's a lot easier to have a consultancy, to have your own service, that you can produce change a bit better than when you have to be internal and play the company politics in a sense.
Yes, you have benefit.
Do you find yourself having to play company politics when you're helping from the outside?
No, luckily not. The only company politics I have to play is, some of the trainings for kind of the compliance stuff and all that. That's
Right.
the only company politics. But the benefit I have is I can come in and I can just throw tables, figuratively. I haven't thrown a table literally yet. But no, in all seriousness, I can challenge the status quo a lot better. And it really helps, again, to not be wired in that much and to point some things out. Now, the challenge is that when you're the head of an organization or even just a leader in an organization, you can drive change by command. That is not very popular these days. I think it's becoming a bit more popular, where it's less of a kind of like a democratic, meritocratic leadership style, but more like, we're doing this now. I'm the leader, I say so. I'm exaggerating a little bit, right? But I think that, especially during zero interest rate times and during the pandemic, there was a lot of consensus leadership style. And now that things are tightening up a little bit, you have more of these quote unquote wartime leaders coming out who just give the direction. And again, this can be done
Do you think that's necessary though?
Not always.
Is it the times that's kind of pushing towards that, and is that an effective approach?
I think it's very underrated. And I say that as somebody who loves consensus and who's a bit conflict averse. I don't like conflict. I don't like coming in and being, but I think too much consensus can slow organizations down a lot. And I think that it is...
You hear that, team?
I think that somebody's going to turn off my mic pretty soon. But in all seriousness, I think that consensus leadership is also sometimes a way to escape responsibility and say, well, we all agreed to this. We all, said yes to it. We all aligned to it. But I think that there are times when it's necessary to come in and say, look, I am the leader. I carry the responsibility and I make the decision. The way that I painted the picture here is obviously very aggressive, and I do this to make the point, right? You wouldn't do this exactly this way. But I think there's something to be said about leaders who come in and say, it's my responsibility, it's my shot to call. I want to listen to all of you, and I take you seriously in your expertise, and I want the input from you. But at the end of the day, I'm going to make the call. And I'm going to make the call tomorrow instead of us aligning 5 meetings and make the call in a month. this is right now for a lot of companies not the time to seek always consensus and always alignment. I think this is more the time for leaders to stand up and say, I take this on, and if I'm wrong and if I've failed, then I should maybe not be the leader, but to stand up and say, look, I take the responsibility for this decision. I have gathered all the input I need to make it. I've listened to everybody in the room respectfully, and I make that call.
Okay, I think that's reasonable. And again, you're right. I think we live in a period where we see a lot of waste when it comes to decision making and decision making processes. So your focus is on execution strategy, not direction strategy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you mentioned earlier. What are some of the activities and some of the specific areas that organizations bring you in to help with?
So it's a very small problem set, which is nice. It's our performance has plateaued. How can we break through that plateau?
Mm-hmm.
2 is we are standing in front of several high impact, hard to reverse decisions, and we want to make them with the highest confidence possible. And 3, things are going well, but we suspect that they could be going a bit better. Can you come in and just see how we execute, see what our strategy looks like, and how we can bring it to the next level?
Right, I see. And what are some of the challenges? I know you mentioned a challenge, but what are some of the challenges that you're facing as you work with some of these organizations? Let's say the most common challenges there is.
The most common challenge is that the strategy is not differentiated.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations try to out-execute their competition, and that is barely a recipe for success. Unless you have way more funding, you can just outweigh your opponent. But the reality is that if you're going up, say you're a startup, right, and you're going up against incumbents, you cannot follow the same path that they have followed to get where they are. It will work 0 out of 10 times. What works is differentiation, which means you need to do something different that allows you to get to that same point or allows you to compete with companies. And something different needs to be related to your quote unquote competitive advantage. We can dive a bit deeper into what that means, because I understand it's very abstract, but figuring out what that competitive advantage is and how to leverage that to create a differentiated strategy is what I help companies with most of the time. And very often get scenarios where people are like, okay, this is the playbook, let's just implement the playbook, but they forget, okay, is that just what everybody else does? And are we just trying to, is this an arbitrage thing or like a marginalized opportunity, or can we actually figure out how to do something better?
You mentioned competitive advantage. Let's dive into that a bit. I'm going to start with a question. You found yourself at any point telling a company where you actually have 0 competitive advantage, so you need to go back to the drawing board. Because the one thing that I was talking about this recently, especially as founders or leadership, we're really good at kind of like hitting our chest of, yeah, we're better, we're doing this. But then when you unpack that, you realize that there's not much there. I'm talking about certain companies, and of course, there are organizations out there that are really good at differentiating themselves. But there's also a lot of companies that want to think that they're different, but they're not. Have you ever encountered scenarios like that?
You know what? Rarely. I think most companies have more competitive advantages than they realize. Sometimes that advantage can just be to be smaller and faster. So let me give you an example with G2, right? We went up against Gartner, big incumbent in the space. And Gartner, not only are they way, way larger, way more established with companies, but they also have a lot more sites, right? They have GetApp and Gartner Reviews, and they have Chemterra. So huge organization and large competitor, but they also move way, way slower than a G2, right? At G2, we had the benefit that we could make product changes faster. We could make our go-to-market strategy, just implement that faster, right? So the downside of size is often dependencies, and you can leverage that as a startup. The challenge then becomes how do you leverage that agility? Where do you quote unquote attack? Can you identify the weak points of your competitors and lean into that? And so we did a whole bunch of things at G2. Basically, essentially, to dive into that, the strategies or the strategic approaches at G2 and Shopify were completely different. At Shopify, it was basically a Facebook-like approach. That's part because a lot of leadership came from Meta, and it was like a very kind of experiment-heavy, high fidelity kind of testing approach. At G2, we ran more of an approach of big bets. What are some of the big kind of, let's take some money to the casino and it's betted on a couple of different numbers or colors, and what should that look like? That really worked out for us because we were just so much smaller and faster, and we could validate these bets at a higher pace.
Interesting. So that did you apply any of the tactics, the experimentation tactics at all, say from Shopify to G2?
So I was
because it seems like you said, there are two separate tactics, big bets versus small tests and iterations and such.
Yeah. So I was at G2 before Shopify, but the point still holds.
Okay.
Because at G2 at the time I was there, we were about 300 to 400 people. At Shopify again, we're like 10,000 people. So and across all organizations, I was part of the growth organization. It was it's smaller, but when you reach that size and you have high fidelity and like a highly rigid approach to anything you do, at Shopify, you're able to just really focus on experimentation velocity. So do we ship more experiments over time? Because at that scale of an organization, good ideas will come out of it. You cannot focus purely on experimentation velocity at a smaller company like G2, where you have 300 to 400 people, because you just don't have enough people to just focus on more experiments. Your bets have to be a lot more calculated, but again, you can validate them a lot quicker. We still ran experiments at G2, but it was not, we didn't focus on just the sheer velocity, whereas again, that approach works really well at Shopify.
And for these two companies, were you internal or were you consulting?
Internal, yeah.
Internal. And tell me a bit about some examples with companies that you've been consulting recently. What did you help them with?
Yep. So let me see. Who can I name? I have to be careful with who I name and how
Well,
much
you've been
I give
throwing names left and right.
Yeah,
I suppose you can talk about anything. So I'm just gonna drill you here.
Okay. I'll just say what category they're in, people can fill in the picture,
Okay.
right? But like a famous D2C startup that I'm working with right now. There it's really all about strategy differentiation. And so I help most companies with their quote unquote organic growth, which means non-paid go-to-market. So SEO, CRO, email, product-led growth, these kind of things. And so what we identified is that direct-to-consumer startup had a profound opportunity to not just leverage their blog for growth and editorial writers, but also lean into, I have to be careful how I phrase and not give the surprise away, but lean into a more scalable approach to SEO, where their product essentially that they're selling is that's just like one of thousands of different products, and there was an opportunity for the company to scale into comparison of all of these products or reviews of all of these products and like kind of give more guidance. That is a new kind of growth arm that they didn't have on their radar before, that has a profound, significant impact on the business, right? And so it's really all about understanding, okay, what are different avenues you can go down to scale your organic growth, scale your SEO, scale product-led growth. Another example of a company, that's a company that operates in the creator space. They provide an email service, a link in bio service, forums for creators, and they have profound product-led growth mechanics that we can tap into that we then identified, validated, and then scaled. For example, if you fill out a form, say you send a form you have a form on your website for people, I don't know, like a lead form or whatever. At the end of people filling that form out, there is a new screen that can pop up to do a follow-up action or something else, right? So that has profound motions because millions of people fill these forms out, and a small fraction will take action on that follow-up screen, and you can kind of scale these things. So those are kind of the things that I help companies identify. And it often goes through like a very basic, it basically runs like a scientific method type of approach, right? Like identify opportunities, test and validate them, scale, refine, start from scratch.
And do you have two questions here? One, how do you measure success with your customers, right? Do you have a template or something that you polished by working with many companies? I know it's also depends on the type of implementation that you do, but in general. And two, how do you how do your proposals look like, right? Someone says, I need help with this.
Yeah.
How do you go about helping them?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What is that process in basically you selling them onto, your dream of a successful outcome for them?
Yeah, totally. My approach to proposals is quite aggressive, actually. I would consider myself a problem-based advisor or a consultant rather than a solution-based advisor or a consultant. And the difference is that, solution-based means you come in and you have like a buffet. Like, here are the 10 things that I do. I can help you stand those things up. Which one do you want? And I often come into the spaces where it's not clear exactly what the solution looks like. It may often not even clear exactly what the problem is. And therefore, I very quickly filter prospects out by price. So I will, at the first encounter, share, just so you know, this is what's going to cost. And like some people would say that's aggressive, but I just very quickly want to get to a point where this could be a potential fit, or we know it's not going to be a fit at all. And then I have the opportunity to connect them with somebody who I know is a better fit and who I trust. So I'm going to say that. And then the proposals are all very lightweight. In there, I obviously have the terms in there. There is a description of the problem or the scope. But then from there, it's not an exact, here is exactly what Kevin will deliver. Here's exactly what will happen. It's like it's a very broad agreement. And the purpose of it is because I come in when things are hard to grasp or it's not exactly clear what the problem is.
Right. So then that's my follow-up question. How does success look like? How do you quantify that?
Yeah, it's 90% is revenue based. So what's the metric that we measure, the North Star metric that ties to revenue? At Shopify, where it was not an advisor, it was in-house, right? But our North Star metric was net new merchants. So whatever we do, everything has to tie back to net new merchants. Does this drive more people to sign up with Shopify, fill out their credit cards information, and start selling? So I try to run that aggressive approach. There's 10% where companies are more interested in, impact on brands, retention, and just kind of awareness or top of the funnel metrics. But 90% it has to tie back to revenue.
Okay. And do you have very specific tooling and methods to track your implementation and your strategies back to revenue?
It usually depends on how the client is set up, what tool stack they use, and I will adapt to that. But very often, it's not uncommon that I come in and companies are like, okay, can you help us find a differentiated strategy? And we have to start by actually setting up the tracking, right? You ask, okay, so what's the sequencing of metrics here? How do we go from an impression in Google to a click to a sign up to what's that whole sequence? And a lot of companies are not aware of that. So I worked with Ramp, for example, the fastest growing fintech startup in history. And I worked with them for a whole year. And the first thing that I came in is to show them, okay, what are the leading and lagging indicators? What are all the ways that we can move the needle downstream, and then realize, okay, wow, there actually is a big opportunity to go more top of the funnel because we know it's going to trickle down to some degree. And then later on, let's see what other metrics we can improve. And it was the same at Shopify, right? Like our experimentation went from like very top of the funnel all the way to maybe the last step before merchants are selling, and all that matters greatly, right? So setting that up is something that I actually do with quite a lot of companies, and the tooling totally depends on what the companies run on, right? So Amplitude, Mixpanel, some have their proprietary data warehouse or like whatever they use for tracking.
Right. Okay. I was trying to figure out which of these companies here actually really love you because you sell their products to all of your customers.
Now it's two.
Awesome. So I've been signaled that we have 5 minutes left. So we'll close off with, before we close off with the flash questions, my ending ceremony for Misfit Founders, I'll ask you one last question, which is, What's the part of your job that you love the most?
So there's this moment when you spend a lot of time, like digging, like getting context about the company, understanding the market, understanding competitors, customers, and then you kind of look at what options do you have for differentiation, and it just kind of clicks. It's like that satisfying moment where you're like, that's it. And everybody's like, looks at it and is like, yes, that's it. That's the most satisfying part, because at the end of the day, you try to kind of find new ways to solve big problems. And when you found a solution that everybody agrees to, that is incredibly satisfying.
I agree. Been there a couple of times, and yes, it is. Well, 3 questions. You already know them because I send them to you.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna expose you to everyone here. Number 1, what's a quote that you live by?
I was thinking about this a lot. And I'm gonna hijack your question because I wasn't able to find this one quote where I
How
was like,
dare you? No, go ahead.
doing things differently, right? Yeah, you should have seen this coming. But it's like, I'm not sure if there's this one quote that really reflects it. It's much more, it's much more a principle. And maybe somebody knows a quote that I'm not aware of, but this whole idea of like a growth mindset has been pivotal to my life, for the reason that I had this like moment when I was like 24, where it was one of these kind of click moments where I realized, oh shit, I can learn most things, and I can, if I really put my mind to it and invest the hard work, I can solve most problems that are in front of me. And I felt maybe most people have that moment, but for me, it was such an epiphany, and it took me to move to Silicon Valley to realize that. Maybe it's a kind of mindset you have there, but it's that you can figure things out type of moment. So growth mindset, I don't know what a good quote is that hits that, but that to me is probably the deepest value that I have and I did a lot of exploration of that, like inherited from my family of origin, personally as a value, and also the value that I instilled in my family.
Perfect. We'll take that. We'll take that answer. Book that impacted your life.
Principles.
Principles.
Ray Dalio, codifying the operating system you run by has been not only super impactful for me personally, but also for the companies that we work with, right? We spoke about Shopify earlier, and at Shopify, we had an operating system for our organization, which is basically a codification of your principles. And just having that clarity is a massive game changer. We're talking about leading large organizations. Clarity is an antidote to slowing your organization down, and codifying your principles is a way to bring clarity.
Brilliant. And then good habit that you advocate for.
Working out.
Yeah.
I kind of, it's sacred to me, spiritual working out, and it's mostly these days for the mental benefits. I get my best ideas when I work out. That is my form of meditation that allows me to step back and reflect. And so, yeah, as cliche as it sounds, working out.
Yeah. I've had so many sessions where I've completely zoned out because I'm thinking everywhere, and then I realize, oh, my workout is done. It's done.
Yeah, because I tried meditating, I tried all these different things, and I kind of gamified it for me, and it never really brought the benefit that I was hoping for. And I think it's because all the stuff that I do most of the day is mental, and having that balance to do something very physical where you just focus on like moving that freaking weight, right, or kind of keep running. That to me is the best meditation, because you just focus on something else, by definition, and you can let your mind wander a little bit, and then all of a sudden all sorts of good things start to pop up.
Yeah, and I'd say even if it's not workout and such, just taking a step back and doing something else. My co-founder in the past, we realized at one point that we were so stuck in the now that we didn't have the time to decompress and just think a bit more holistically about things. So we kind of implemented once a week just going out for a beer with absolutely no context, no purpose, and a lot of good stuff came out of that.
Man, that's one of the biggest lessons that I still have to learn, and that I've been learning throughout my life is space. How do you prevent space? Again, coming back to yourself, where maybe not your whole day needs to be scheduled, right? Or maybe it comes back to organizations as well. How do you create slack in the system so that big organizations can adapt, can pivot when necessary without causing thrash? And it's the same for yourself. And it's exactly these kind of things, creating space by doing something unstructured, like going for a beer, and just see what pops up. And you'll see, oh my God, most of the time, brilliant things pop up. Either you deepen your relationship, or you think of something and you come to the same conclusion that is super profound. But, that's another kind of vice of large organizations. There's no slack in the system.
Yeah. I tend to call it white space.
Yeah.
And it's very important for organizations as well. Thank you so much. I have a gift for you for being on my podcast. You are the 45th guest on the podcast.
I love it.
And honestly, I think we need to have a follow-up because, my style is lengthy conversations, an hour and a half to 2 hours. I really want to dig into your path of getting where you are now, your entrepreneurship journey, the challenges along the way. But I think this was a good taster.
That's a good appetizer. Thanks for having me, and take this as my commitment to want to come to your podcast. I would love to continue the conversation, and thanks for the amazing gift. 45 feels like a nice round number. If you had given me 46, I'd be like, that's cool, but it's 45 is the number.
Yes, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone tuning in.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
We definitely need to do a part 2.
Yeah, dude. When you said 5 minutes, I was like,
I was surprised. I was like, what the hell?